is shining, in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us, set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me, shine on me, shine, Jesus, shine, fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light.
Good morning and welcome to Let the Bible Speak. My name is Alex Meredith. I'm so glad you're able to join me this morning. We are going to be in Matthew chapter 8 today, looking specifically at verses 18 through 22. We'll get to that in a minute. We're continuing this series that we started a long time ago now on the Gospel of Matthew. We're here still kind of in the early stages of it, but we're making some good progress. I want to tell you about a man named Philip Cash. Philip Cash, well, he's not alive anymore, but you can go down to Andersonville, Georgia today, where there used to be a huge Confederate prison camp during the Civil War. It's actually probably the most notorious of these that existed during the war. There were thousands upon thousands of Union soldiers that were captured and put there, and many of them did not survive. The conditions there were just abysmal. And so among these was a man named Philip Cash. He was part of the Union Army, the Kentucky Cavalry, 1st Regiment, Company J. He died on May 21st, 1864. And Philip Cash is my great, I think I got that correct, grandfather. And there's a tombstone there in the Andersonville Cemetery. I've got a picture of it in front of me, but I can't show it on the screen right now. And it's got his name on it, shows the state where he's from, and it has a number on it. I'm curious, I actually don't know what this number means. It has 1268. If any of you know, feel free to shoot us a message. But his tombstone is lying there in the Andersonville Cemetery. Now, obviously, I've never met the guy. But that grave is valuable to my family. Not the least of which because, you know, there's history there, and that history is fascinating and interesting, but also simply because he's family, right? I've never met him, but and he's generations removed from me, but he's family, and that really means something, right? And I think we live in a society generally that cares not just about family, but I would say that cares about the dead. I think that's evidenced in part by the rituals that we have surrounding death. We don't see it as proper to walk around and nonchalantly in a cemetery or to do things we shouldn't do to tombstones or anything like that. We have funerals that we carry out, and we carry those out with respect and reverence. That shows something about how our culture views this idea of death. It's important to us. About a year ago today, my mother passed away. And as I've shared on this program before, it was a hurried circumstance. I actually found out on a Wednesday night after I finished doing class at the Marquette Church. I got a call, was told that my mother had passed out unconscious in a dog park. And the next few hours was trying to figure out what exactly had happened, what exactly her, medical state condition was, and well, learned pretty quickly that one way or another I needed to get down there. And I really wanted to get down there before she passed away. And the trip down there was just abysmal. in every possible way. It all came to a head when at one point the car we were driving, it literally broke apart from under us. The strut on the right rear wheel just failed. It had rusted out from the snow and salt and everything else, and it just gave out, broke apart, and the wheel just came to a grinding halt. So that car totally undrivable. But, we found a way to get down there. And I think it would have really taken a lot, certainly a lot more than a broken vehicle, to prevent me from being present. Not just at her bedside when she passed, but at her funeral. We went over and she's buried now at a grave in southern Tennessee. And you wouldn't have been able to keep me from being there, because that's really important. To me, that kind of thing is important to all of us, right? Even back in ancient Jewish society, burial and death, these were important concepts, and those rituals around death were really important, especially when it came to burial, actually. We see this demonstrated in Scripture. We actually see it demonstrated in other ancient Jewish literature. So, for instance, over in Genesis 23, we see the account of the burial of Sarah, Abraham's wife. After Sarah passes away, Abraham makes a really big deal of going over to the Hittites and purchasing a piece of property to bury her in. That was a really important thing, and there's a big section of text devoted to that. Over in Genesis 49, going into Genesis 50, you have this whole section that talks about the burial of Jacob, the father of Joseph and the 12 tribes. And Joseph, even in his prominent position within the political landscape of Egypt, he takes his whole company of officers, of Egyptian officers, to go up to that place where Sarah was buried, to go up and to bury Jacob in that same location. And there's just such a big deal made up of it. There's this big procession where they're mourning together and crying out. The people of the cities are crying out. It's a really big deal. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 26, this is an interesting passage. It's kind of the inverse. We see that burial was a valuable thing because in this passage, it's actually a curse against enemies of God. It says, if you become God's enemies, this is what's going to happen to you. Your dead body shall be food for all birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth, and there shall be no one to frighten them away. So that was a bad thing. You wanted to make sure that the body was treated with reverence and respect. That was really important. There's even a piece of literature, it's not in the Bible, but it's in a book called Tobit. It's the account of this Israelite who lives in Nineveh during the Assyrian siege and there's a small deportation of people to Nineveh. And so this Israelite, he sees these bodies of his fellow brothers that are being tossed outside the city walls. And it says, if I saw one of my people who had died and been thrown behind the wall of Nineveh, I used to bury him. That's how significant this matter was treated. And there was a whole process to it. One day after death, this was the practice of the Jewish people when it came to burial. Anytime somebody died, one day after their death, remember there was no embalming, at least not among the Israelites typically. So they had to hurry. They would place the body in a tomb. If there was some kind of violent death, think Jesus, they would actually wrap the body first. So one day after the death, they'd be placed in a tomb, and they would have, en route, they would have this funeral procession, people crying out. They would hire musicians to play music along the way. They would hire criers to get people's attention to join in to this procession. 1 year after their death, after their flesh had largely decayed, they would actually take the bones of the body and they would put it into an ossuary, this little box, no bigger than something like that. They would put the bones into a box and they would move the ossuary to a dedicated spot for the purpose. There were these caves and tombs where several ossuaries are found all together. In Joshua 24, we actually see this happening with the bones of Joseph. You see his bones in an ossuary being moved to this cave. So all throughout this process, the sons of the deceased play a really a really critical role. The sons are the ones leading the funeral procession. And in fact, according to Jewish tradition, it was considered a grave, no pun intended, sin not to attend. If a son were to not attend the funeral procession or the burial rituals of a deceased parent, that was so criminal. It wasn't actually criminal, but it was so taboo. It was unheard of. This duty took precedence over everything else, even something like the study of Scripture, right? So, with all that in mind, I know that was a lot of lead up, but I want you to really get the picture of this, okay? Let's read Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 18. You've got Jesus with these huge crowds by the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is about to cross over to the other side of the sea, okay? So Matthew 8, starting in verse 18. Now, when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And a scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Follow me, and leave the dead to bury their own dead." We started this whole lesson by talking about Jewish burial customs because I wanted you to see just how offensive it would be. The idea that Jesus has here, the suggestion that just forget about it, let the dead bury themselves. Don't worry about it. Follow me instead. This passage really is about two men with two very different responses to Jesus. You have this one man who's on fire, right? "I'll follow you wherever you go, Jesus." But he doesn't really have much understanding of what he's committing to. So he's on fire, but very little understanding there. And then the second man, he seems willing, but he's got this hesitation about him. He doesn't really quite want to commit. There's some things holding him back. So let's talk about these two men. So the first man, he's said to be a scribe, right? You have the scribe coming out. He says, "Jesus, I will follow you wherever you want to go." Now think about where Jesus went for a second. Not just already in the book of Matthew, but think about where he's going. You have him doing these amazing things. Yes, having this incredible attention placed on him. And there's a lot of, even the New Testament uses the word fame as a positive thing. So you have all of these amazing things happening, but what is he also experiencing? He's experiencing the antagonism of some of the people he grew up with. People think he's crazy, some of them. There are people who are already out to get him. Some of the Jewish leaders, he's getting some of the wrong attention from the Roman people. Presumably he's the reason, according to Matthew, why there was this whole slaughter in the city of Bethlehem as Jesus was an infant. Okay? So, are you sure you want to follow him? Not just that, do you know where he's going? He's marching into the city of Jerusalem. And he's going to be the object of the most unfair, unjust, political, religious persecution that's ever occurred. Are you sure you're ready to follow him wherever he goes? That's a pretty big statement, He got so caught up in the excitement of the whole thing. And, the beginning of chapter 8, there he is, healing people left and right. How can you not get caught up in the excitement, right? He got so caught up in the excitement that he didn't realize that following Jesus entails real, genuine sacrifice. That's why Jesus, in verse 20, he says, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests. I don't even have a place to sleep at night." Are you sure you're ready to follow me? to all of the places I go? Not just the exciting places, not just when it's fun, but even when it's hard? Are you sure you're ready to follow? Tom Wright, I think, gives an excellent description of the nature of Jesus' mission. And he says, look, because this is the nature of Jesus' mission, this also becomes the nature of the mission for his followers. He says Jesus' mission is to, quote, to go to the places where the world is in its deepest pain and be there with and for the people who are suffering it. Are you willing to go those places with Jesus? Yeah, there's glory at the end. But for now, it means carrying your own cross. Are you willing to do that? There's a really good description of this first man we see elsewhere in the Gospels, I think. There's a passage, we've not actually come to it yet in Matthew, we will, but it's called the parable of the sower. In this parable, Jesus is explaining how the word of the kingdom gets out into the world, and how, different people have different responses to this message, different responses to the gospel. And in one of those descriptions, this is what he says, and I'm going to be reading from Luke chapter 8, verse 13. He describes, and the ones on the rock, this is the seed scattered out on the rock, the ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the word, receive it with joy, but these have no root. They believe for a while, and in time of testing, fall away. I think that's an excellent description of where this first guy is at. Now, do we know exactly how he would have done given those future trials? I don't know. I mean, we're not told that he follows him after this, so I suspect maybe there wasn't something incredibly deep to his confession. But that's what happens to a lot of us. We get so excited. We hear this message of grace and mercy and God's forgiveness and these miraculous things that Jesus did, and we're ready for it. But then you realize what discipleship actually entails. And it's so easy at that point to say, you know what, I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I want to. And so the seed is choked out. Jesus, he just wants people to know what they're committing to. Now, he's not trying to discourage them, right? He's just trying to prepare them. But clearly, he believes that there is no greater calling. There is no greater calling than the calling of Christ. And that leads us to the second man. So here you have the second man. And we're not told much about him. It just says another of the disciples. This isn't one of the 12 disciples. This appears to be one of the disciples that's just one of the larger crowd. So you have the second man that comes up. He says, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. And Jesus responds, follow me, let the dead bury their own dead. Essentially, forget about it. Leave him and come right now. Now, why would Jesus deny a man the opportunity to bury his own father, from attending his own father's funeral? Well, maybe there are a few components to it. Some have suggested that, God is the God of the living, and really, Jesus is just focused right now on taking care of the people who are alive, and he doesn't have time to, at least not now, to spend worrying about the dead. And maybe he needs his disciples to do the same. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe there's something here about letting go of the past and moving towards the future. I'm not too sure about that one, but there might be something there. I think the real core of this is simply that it's that important. That's the base of it, right? You need to stop whatever you're doing and come right now, because the boat, remember Jesus was about to cross over to the other side, the boat might not be here when you come back, right? It might require sacrifice, but this decision to follow Jesus is more important than the most important thing. than anything else you could possibly conceive of. There's nothing more urgent. And if you think about this on a practical level, sure, there is nothing more urgent than the sanctification of your soul. There's nothing more urgent than ridding your soul of your sins so that you can appear before God, before the judgment seat of Christ, without spot or blemish or any such thing. There's nothing more important than that, and there really isn't. No matter what excuses we want to come up with, no matter what else we might want to prioritize in front, Jesus comes first, right? The world that Satan presents to us is all out of order. He has convinced millions of people in this world today and in times past, he has convinced them that the most important thing in the world is maybe it's wealth or status, maybe it's pleasure or happiness, maybe it's politics. That's what Satan has convinced so many people. And every day there are a lot of people, including believers, people who believe in Jesus, who fall for it. Okay, yeah, I'll come. Yeah, I know that I need to do that, and I know I need to stop doing this, but first, fill in the blank. But first, let me go do this other thing. But first, let me do what I want for a little while. Leave me alone. I'll worry about that stuff when I'm close to my deathbed. Well, here's the problem with that. You don't know when that is. The boat might be gone when you get back. For all we know, Jesus could come any minute now, before this episode even airs. We just don't know. So we need to keep our priorities straight. Jesus comes first. Prayer comes before prophet. The cross comes before lacrosse. The church comes before, best I could come up with was churros. Church before churros. And I like churros, so that's saying something. I know I'm being a little funny with it, but it's true. Your faith comes before everything else. And if you try to disorder that, as soon as you try to flip things around and change how that looks and how that works, the whole thing falls apart. So the challenge today is to stop what you're doing and to put Jesus first, to sanctify your soul of sin, to prioritize your faith, to leave the dead to bury their own dead, to put the first things first. It really is that important. And if you don't know where to start, connect with your local church. We have actually on our website, letthebiblespeak.net, there's a tab up there, churches, or church, I can't remember which. But you click on that, you can get connected to a local church and start that journey of prioritizing your faith. One last passage I want to look at with you. This is from Luke chapter 10. I'm going to be reading from Luke 10, verse 38 and following. I think this is a fantastic example of the kind of thing we're discussing here. So Luke 10, 38. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." Mary chose to prioritize at that moment sitting at the feet of Christ and learning and growing and being a disciple. And there are some people around you that will be frustrated at the fact that that's what you choose to prioritize. That doesn't mean it's any less important. I want to take a minute as we start to wrap up here. I want to extend an invitation to all of our listeners here today. We have a graphic to put up on the screen here is to tell you about this. The Marquette Church of Christ, about every other year, hosts something we call Praise at the Park. This is hosted out at the Presque Isle Pavilion in Presque Isle Park. It's on 3 Peter White Drive is the address to it if you need it. But on Sunday, September 15th, a couple weeks from now, the church is going to be meeting out there, and that's where we're going to have our Sunday morning worship service. So if that's something that you are interested in participating in, if you know of any friends or family that would like to come, feel free to come to that. We're going to be meeting out there around 10:30. We've got some coffee and donuts that we're going to have to share with everyone who comes. We have worship starting at 11 a.m. That's going to last about an hour, and then following that, we're going to have a potluck lunch together around noon. You don't have to bring anything, but if you'd like to, feel free. And of course, there's no charge or any expectation from you on your account. Just come and show up, bring yourself, and we would love to see you and to meet you. Again, this is a special worship service put on by the Marquette Church of Christ about every other year. This year it's going to be Sunday, September 15th at 11 a.m. Stop by before and after for some food and fellowship. Other than that, I want to make sure to offer you some of the resources that we have to all of our listeners. We have a workbook series called our Bible Correspondence course. You can find this both in paper or online. You can participate in this either way. If you do it on paper, you do it through mail. You just write to us, let us know that you want to participate. We send you the book, and then you can do it that way. We'll give you some feedback along the way. You can also do it online with one of the World Bible School teachers and tutors that they have set up through their tutoring mentorship program. You can do that as well through worldbibleschool.org. If you don't have a Bible, and you would like one, we also offer those to all of our listeners. With all of this, there is never any charge or any expectation that you do anything in return. We just want to provide this for anyone who needs it. If you would like to participate in any of that, feel free you can reach us by mail at the Marquette Church of Christ through P.O. Box 372, that's in Marquette, Michigan, zip code 49855. You can also find a lot of this information and more at letthebiblespeak.net. If you haven't already, check us out on Spotify and on YouTube. You can find us on those at Let the Bible Speak UP. You do have to add the UP on there to find our specific channel, but you can listen to and watch all of these episodes online as well as watch them on WLUC TV6, as you are right now. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen this morning, to join me in this study. We're going to continue working through the book of Matthew over the next several weeks. We're going to be moving forward in Matthew chapter 8 next week. So I hope you're able to join us for that. We are on every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Other than that, I'm glad to see you this morning. I hope you have a wonderful and blessed week. Please reach out if there's anything at all that we can do for any of you. So may God bless you. Have a wonderful week. Take care, and let the Bible speak.
The Father's glory blaze, Spirit blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word.